In the still hours of night, when the light of the world softens and every distant sound fades into air, there remains something constant, a quiet rhythm beneath the passing of centuries. It moves gently, almost unseen, through every generation, binding together all the lives that have ever been. From ancient valleys carved by hand and rain, to the high walls of castles built of grey stone, from silent tents that rest beneath the stars, to the first thin rails of iron stretching across a young continent. That rhythm continues. It is the breath of human time. People have followed it without knowing. They have built homes beside it, sung to it, worked and rested to its pace. It is the sound of a pot being placed upon a fire, of footsteps on a dirt path, of ink drying on a letter that will travel for weeks to reach the one it names. Through this long unfolding story, humanity has always searched for connection. Each age finds its own way to reach another heart. Through marriage or friendship, through a glance, a promise, a shared task, through the simple presence of another breathing nearby. In medieval halls, this rhythm echoed in ceremony. Vows were spoken, hands joined, and entire families tied together through words that were more binding than desire. On far plains it, through grass that bent to the wind. In the age of steam, it followed the whistle of trains that carried hope and distance in equal measure. It is not a story of triumph or sorrow. It is a story of persistence, the quiet endurance of human life. The thread of time has no hurry. It drifts like a slow river, carrying fragments of laughter, of work, of sleep. If you listen closely, you can almost sense its pulse, steady and calm, as if the earth itself were breathing. For thousands of years, people have looked at the same moon. They have stood beside the same kind of fire, hearing it crackle, feeling warmth rise against the night air. Their names change and their languages fade, but the gestures remain: a hand reaching toward another, a home built against the weather, a song hummed to calm a child. The thread connects them all. It carries stories from one shore of time to the next. Stories of how people met, how they stayed, how they passed, what they had learned to those who followed. Sometimes it passes through silence, years with no written word. Only the trace of tools, the pattern of fields, the mark of a footprint where grass once grew. Sometimes it flows through music, the slow rhythm of a harp, the rise and fall of a worker's song. Always it moves forward, never rushing, never stopping. Tonight, we will follow that thread. We will drift through 10 quiet chapters of human history. Moments when love, work, and endurance shaped the rhythm of the world. We will begin in the age of castles and cobblestone roads, where marriages were forged by agreement rather than affection. Then we will move among the knights and poets, who spoke of love as devotion rather than passion. We will listen to the steady lives of farmers, whose affection was measured not in words, but in the care they offered each day. Later, the thread will lead us across open grasslands, where riders moved with the wind and the horizon. It will take us through the story of a queen, through the memory of travelers and builders, and finally along the quiet steel lines that united a vast new land. Each moment is small. Each life is part of something larger. And as we move through them, we will do so slowly, as though walking through soft mist, without hurry, without noise. Let the world outside this room grow distant. Let the breath settle. The night holds you now, and time itself becomes a gentle tide. In that stillness, you may sense how near the past truly is. not as a story of battles and empires, but as a series of quiet evenings like this one, where someone, somewhere, paused at the end of the day and listened to the same silence. So breathe with the turning of the earth. Allow the mind to loosen its hold. The centuries will unfold at their own calm pace, and you will drift with them. The journey begins now, softly, slowly, on the gentle thread of time. Love and marriage in the medieval world. In the long centuries we call the Middle Ages, love was not the foundation of marriage. It was a quiet visitor, sometimes welcomed, sometimes unnoticed. Life moved according to duty. Families were joined not by affection, but by need. To marry was to secure land, to protect inheritance, to continue a name. In the manor halls of Europe, a wedding was an arrangement of households. Parents, guardians, or local lords spoke on behalf of the young. Agreements were written, blessings prepared, and the couple, often barely acquainted, stood before witnesses to seal a contract that would shape the rest of their days. For nobles, a match could extend power. A single union might join two regions, combine two coats of arms, and ensure peace between rival families. The bride brought wealth, the groom offered protection. In parchment and ink, their futures were fixed. For common people, the meaning was simpler, yet no less serious. A marriage joined two workers, two lives bound by teeth. Fields needed hands, animals needed tending, children needed raising. A home without partnership was fragile in the cold seasons. Most weddings were arranged early. Betrothals might begin when the couple were still children, their families agreeing on dowry, land, and lineage long before affection had a chance to grow. When the time came, a priest or village elder spoke the words that bound them. There were no grand processions, only the scent of earth and bread, the echo of bells, and the solemn exchange of vows. After the ceremony, life began quietly. Each morning brought work. Ploughing, spinning, mending, baking. Every act of labor became a language of companionship, to share bread, to tend animals side by side, to care for the hearth. These were gestures of love, though no one called them that. The idea of romantic affection belonged more to songs than to daily life. Yet even in a world ruled by arrangement, the heart sometimes chose its own path. There are letters, faded and brief, in which husbands wrote to absent wives of missing their voices. There are records of women who waited faithfully for men, lost to distant wars or trade. Such tenderness was quiet, rarely spoken aloud, but it existed like a candle that continued to burn long after the feast was over. In noble courts, the expectation of marriage was obedience. A young woman might be promised. To a man decades older, her role was to manage his estate, bear heirs, and maintain honor. Education prepared her for this. To weave, to keep accounts, to host guests with calm grace. For men, the duty was to defend the family's name and maintain order. Affection was considered secondary, a pleasant accident. Yet in surviving diaries, one can still sense the comfort that grew between some pairs, a mutual respect, a shared patience. Houses were built of stone and timber, but a marriage was built of repetition. Day by day, through harvest and winter, two people learned each other's rhythms. Love, when it appeared, did not arrive like lightning. It settled slowly like dust on sunlight. The church defined the ceremony, but life defined the meaning. Marriage was both sacred promise and social necessity. It offered stability and it demanded endurance. There was little space for dreams, but much for habit. And sometimes habit became the gentlest form of devotion. Among farmers, weddings were humble. Neighbors gathered music, played on simple pipes. Bread and ale were shared. The bride might wear a wreath of herbs, symbols of health and luck. Dancing followed until nightfall, and by morning the couple began their first day together, as partners in work. Homes were small, but within them life unfolded fully. Children came quickly, and each birth tied families closer to the land they worked. The survival of a household depended on cooperation. If affection deepened, it did so through shared fatigue and quiet gratitude. In towns, artisans and merchants approached marriage as alliance too. A potter's daughter might wed a blacksmith's son, uniting two trades, two apprenticeships, two shopfronts beneath the same roof. Their world was busy, filled with the clatter of tools, but within it, moments of stillness bloomed. A shared meal, a smile over the day's earnings. For the poorest, the choice to marry was often dictated by necessity. They sought partners who could weather hardship, who could share the burden of uncertain harvests. Love, in that setting, was not a story. It was endurance. Across villages and valleys, marriage created the structure of medieval life. It shaped inheritance, governed property, and determined alliances. Yet beneath these rules, the same quiet human desire persisted to belong, to be known, to find warmth in another's presence. There were few private moments. Houses held large families, neighbors lived close, and community life left little space for solitude. But in the rare, quiet hours, perhaps beside a low fire, husband and wife could speak softly of crops, of the children, of small hopes for the coming year. These were not grand romances, they were steady lives woven into the larger tapestry of the age. Marriage brought security and in return demanded effort. A failed harvest, a long winter, a lost animal. All could test a household. To endure together was the truest form of partnership. When sickness came, care became the purest act of love. When one partner died, the other carried on, raising children, keeping fields alive, honoring the memory, not through tears but through work. The chronicles of the Middle Ages speak little of affection. They record alliances, land and law, yet between those lines we glimpse the softer parts of life, a husband teaching his wife to write her name, a wife saving coins, to light candles for his journey home. Time smooths away the noise of history, leaving only these faint impressions. Moments of care, unwritten promises, the steady companionship. That made survival possible. In the medieval world, love rarely announced itself. It did not arrive in poems or parades. It grew quietly, in kitchens, in fields, in shared fatigue. It was the warmth of two hands working the same soil. It was endurance, and it was enough. Courtly love. In the quiet halls of medieval castles, a new form of love began to take shape. It was not the love of family, nor the bond of marriage, nor the partnership of survival. It was something delicate, distant, and filled with ritual. The nobles of Europe lived by rules, rules of birth, of duty, of conduct. Every gesture, every glance carried meaning. And in this world of ceremony, emotion found its place not in freedom, but in form. This was courtly love. It was not about possession, nor about the building of a household. It was about admiration, refined, restrained, and endlessly symbolic. A knight would choose a lady. She might be married or promised to another or far beyond his reach. That distance was the point. It preserved purity. It made feelings safe to express because it could never be fulfilled. In this love there was no touch, only words and gestures and long silences filled with meaning. A glance across a hall, a ribbon tied around a wrist, a glove carried into battle. Each act was a message, each token a quiet confession. Bards and poets turned this idea into a language of their own. They sang of longing, not as pain, but as proof of nobility. To love without was seen as virtue, a way to refine the heart. The troubadours of southern France, the minnesingers of Germany, the poets of Italy, each carried these stories. From court to court, from hall to hall, their songs filled the stone chambers with soft melody, their verses written on parchment and sealed with wax. For the knight's love was a form of discipline. To admire a lady was to practice loyalty and self-control. It was a mirror of their code. To serve, to protect, to honor without reward. A knight might dedicate victories to his chosen lady. Her colors would be stitched into the lining of his cloak, her name whispered. In the quiet before battle, in his heart, she was both muse and memory. The lady, in turn, was not passive. She was the keeper of grace, the embodiment of ideal behavior. Through her, men were reminded to act with gentleness and temper their power with restraint. At her table, a man's worth was measured by courtesy, not conquest. To speak softly, to listen, to show patience. These became virtues of love. The poetry of courtly love described the beloved as distant, as light as the morning star. She was never fully human. She was perfection imagined. A figure who inspired devotion, without demand, and yet beneath the careful formality there was real feeling, a longing that stretched through every word of every song, a sadness that was calm, not tragic, the ache of beauty that can never be touched. In illuminated manuscripts, painters captured these ideas. In color and gold, a knight kneeling before a lady offering a rose or a dove. Their faces serene, their eyes lowered, their hands never quite meeting. It was art, as much as it was emotion, a way for people bound by duty and expectation to express tenderness without breaking the rules. At the heart of it all was the belief that love could make a person better. Not through passion, but through patience. To love truly was to love quietly, without asking, without taking, without end. This idea spread far beyond its birthplaces. It shaped the way Europe thought about affection for centuries. It appeared in songs, in plays, in the early stories that would one day become legend. The tale of Tristan and Isolde, of Lancelot and Guinevere, each born from this world, where duty and desire stood side by side. In these stories, love is both gift and burden. It elevates and restrains. It gives life meaning, but never freedom. And though the stories end in sorrow, the sorrow is gentle, a sigh rather than a cry. For listeners of that time, these romances were not lessons in rebellion. They were reflections of longing, within boundaries that to love from afar
was safer than to love in truth.
At court, this dance of devotion became part of social life. A conversation, a poem recited after a meal, a game of verbal exchange. Where admiration was offered and modesty received it, it was both entertainment and education. Through it, young nobles learned poise, humility, and grace. Even the gestures of everyday life echoed these ideals. The bow of greeting, the kiss upon the hand,
The sharing of a song.
each moment was framed by restraint. For women of rank, courtly love offered a rare kind of power. While their marriages
Were often political.
within this ritual of admiration, they could be seen, heard, and honored.
A lady might inspire poems.
That traveled far beyond her walls. Her name, even spoken in secret, could live for generations. And though she did not command armies, she ruled hearts. Over time, the language of courtly love,
Blended with the moral language of the age, it spoke of purity,
of dignity,
of constancy.
even when the poets did not mean devotion to heaven, their words found echoes there, gentle parallels between human affection and the longing for something higher. But for most who lived it, courtly love was simply a way to feel alive. Within a world of rules, it was the softest rebellion.
Emotion disguised as etiquette.
Through poems and song, the culture of Europe learned to speak of love in new ways. The harshness of survival was softened by verse. The silence of arranged marriage was filled with melody. And even though
Few lived the kind of love.
that poets described, the idea itself endured.
It shaped the words people used, the gestures they made.
The way they dreamed of being remembered. By the late Middle Ages, the custom began to fade. Wars changed the courts and new ideas took root, but the image remained. A knight kneeling, a lady serene, two lives bound by nothing more than a promise never spoken. Even centuries later, this image survives.
In paintings,
In language, in the quiet belief that loved to be pure,
must be patient.
the tradition of courtly love,
May have begun as ritual,
but it left behind
a way of thinking that the heart can find beauty.
in distance and meaning, in restraint. As the music fades, the stone halls fall silent again. Only echoes remain of lute strings, of careful footsteps, of words carried on air. Love in that age was not a flame, it was a soft glow, protected, preserved, and eternal. Love among common folk. Beyond the stone walls of castles, beyond the marble corridors and songs of knights, lay another world. The world of fields, of tools, of rain,
Of ordinary people whose hands carried the weight of every day.
Here, love was not written in poetry.
It was not sung to the sound of lutes.
It lived quietly, woven into the rhythm of life itself. The people of the villages and farms,
Rose with the dawn,
they began their day before the sun had lifted the mist, when roosters called and the smell of wood smoke drifted across narrow roads. For them, affection was not an ideal,
but a partnership of endurance.
to love was to share the work of survival.
Two people might meet at the market,
Or while helping in the fields, or during the great seasonal gatherings, harvest festivals, planting days, or fairs where trade and laughter mixed with shy glances between strangers. The choice of a partner was rarely about romance. It was about trust, strength, and reliability. Someone who could lift a plow, carry water from the well, keep a hearth burning through the coldest months. A good husband was a man who worked, A good wife was one who kept the home warm, and the children fed. Yet within those expectations, real tenderness often grew. A shared meal at the end of a long day, a smile exchanged across the fields.
A hand that brushed against another,
while passing a basket of bread. These were their love stories. Quiet, unnoticed, but lasting. Their gifts to each other were simple things: a carved spoon, a woven belt, a jug of fresh milk, a wreath of flowers from the meadow. No gold or silk, but tokens filled with care,
made by the giver's own hands.
And when two people decided to wed, the celebration was brief, but full of meaning. Neighbors gathered, ale was brewed, bread was baked. Sometimes a fiddler played, sometimes only the rhythm of clapping hands. There were no elaborate feasts, no distant guests in fine clothing, only the village, the family, and the earth beneath their feet. A wedding was not a fantasy.
It was a beginning,
a promise to work side by side. The home might be a single room, with a low ceiling and an earthen floor. But inside that room, the warmth of shared labor became the warmth of affection. Love, for the common folk, was measured in small acts. In winter, a husband repairing a thatched roof, while his wife mended torn clothes beside the fire. In summer, two figures walking home from the fields, their shadows long against the light. There were moments of laughter too, in songs sung at harvest, in stories told after supper, in children's games by the river. Joy was simple, and so was the sorrow that followed when times were hard. When famine came or sickness swept through a village, couples leaned on each other in silence. Grief was not spoken aloud, but carried together. A man might dig a grave with his own hands, and the woman beside him would place flowers, without saying a word. In these acts, love lived quietly, not as romance, but as endurance. In the records of towns and parishes, the lives of such people appear only as names, births, marriages, deaths. But behind those lines were stories of care. Letters rarely survive, for most could not write. Yet their love was written elsewhere. In the marks they left on the land, in the walls they built, in the generations that followed them. During winter, families gathered close around the hearth. The day ended early, the sky dark by afternoon. It was in those long evenings that affection found its quiet voice.
In the sharing of soup,
the rhythm of spinning wool, the soft murmuring of songs.
Passed from parent to child.
A husband might carve toys from wood. For the youngest children, a wife might mend his worn coat with the best patch of cloth she had saved.
These were the gestures that replaced
the love letters of nobles. They were humble, but they endured. Even in small villages, stories traveled. People told tales of lovers who ran away from arranged marriages or of widows who found companionship again. But such tales were told softly, by firelight, as caution more than rebellion. The village valued order, and love was expected to fit within it. Still, life was not without feeling. When the harvest was good and the work complete, there were festivals, moments when music filled the night, and candles flickered under open skies. During those nights, even the shyest souls might dance, might laugh, might hold another's hand for a little too long. And perhaps, when the season turned again, they would stand together before the elders and promise to share a life. For the poor, the home was both fragile and sacred. A small fire roof of straw, a bed of straw and linen shared by two.
Children came quickly.
Time moved in cycles, planting, reaping, resting. Each year carried the same tasks, the same hopes. And in that repetition, love found its shape.
But it was not a story to be sung,
but a life to be lived. The rhythm of their affection matched the rhythm of the earth itself, steady, patient, neither sudden nor loud.
If the noble courts
Celebrated love in words,
the people of the soil
celebrated it in work. Every furrow ploughed, every loaf baked, every wall mended was a sign of care.
When night fell
When the fields were dark,
they sat together in silence.
listening to the wind and the slow creak of wood in the fire. There, between shadows and warmth, the day came to its quiet end. Their love did not seek eternity. It sought tomorrow, to wake again beside one another, to begin again, to keep going, and so across the centuries,
Their small acts of kindness
became the unseen foundation of everything that followed, for even when history remembers, only the kings and knights, it is these unnamed hearts that kept the world alive. Their story teaches no lesson, offers no grand truth. It simply exists. The quiet heartbeat of ordinary life. Love among the common folk was never a legend.
It was the steady warmth
That made existence possible, and perhaps that was its greatest beauty. Dowries and unions. In the medieval world, every marriage began with an exchange.
not only of vows, but of value.
Land, animals, coins, far. A wedding was not simply.
For those of noble birth, the union of two houses could change the map of a region.
An alliance, a single signature could.
The bride carried her D.
The groom's family. These were the quiet transactions of power, arranged over parchment and candlelight.
Fathers and stewards counted each coin.
Mothers inspected linens and jewels. The young couple, often silent, waited while their futures were measured in weight and worth. Yet beneath the numbers, a different story unfolded, one of continuity. Marriage was not only an agreement between two people,
But between two generations,
each union carried the memory of those before it, and the expectation of those still to come. The dowry, though material, was also symbolic. It represented trust. A bride's family showed faith in her new home by giving part of their fortune to sustain it. If she were widowed, this same gift might protect her from poverty. Gold and grain were more than wealth. They were the threads that bound families across decades. Among the wealthy, these preparations were grand. Months before the ceremony, artisans crafted gifts. Letters of negotiation crossed great distances by horseback. A single jewel could travel farther than many would journey in a lifetime. When all was settled, the contracts were sealed before witnesses, and the bride's belongings were carefully loaded onto carts that creaked toward her new life. In the cities, the merchants and guildsmen followed similar customs on a smaller scale. The dowry might consist of fine cloth, a workshop, or a share in a business. Marriages linked trade routes as effectively as any treaty. A cobbler's daughter married to a weaver's son. A vintner's child joined with a shipowner's heir. Commerce and kinship walked side by side. In villages and farms, the meaning was simpler still. The gift could be a cow, a patch of land, or a set of tools. Sometimes it was only a promise, a few sacks of grain after harvest, a corner of a father's field to build upon. To those who worked the soil, even these small gestures carried weight. They meant stability, a beginning, a home. After the bargaining ended, the ceremony began. It might take place inside a church of stone or outside beneath an open sky with the smell of grass and earth beneath the guests' feet. The priest spoke the sacred words. The people repeated them. Hands were joined, rings exchanged, and the witnesses murmured their approval. The moment was brief, yet it marked the start of a lifetime of shared labor. From that day forward, the two would be seen as one household, their fortunes rising or falling together. Divorce was almost unknown. To separate a union required cause beyond the reach of ordinary life. Only the church could annul a marriage, and only under rare conditions. A hidden tie of kinship, a vow made in error, or a union never physically joined. For nearly everyone, marriage was final. And so people learned to live within it. Some discovered friendship where none had been expected. Others found comfort in familiarity, a rhythm that grew gentler with age. Love, when it appeared, did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded like dawn, slow, quiet, inevitable. In the records of towns and manors, we find traces of these lives, notes of dowries delivered, disputes settled, payments of grain and wool. Between the lines, one can almost sense the daily patience of marriage. Two voices calling across a yard,
two hands mending the same roof.
The dowry ensured that the wife held a measure of security. If her husband died, she retained her portion of goods or land. In some regions, she was allowed to manage property or trade on her own. Though limited by law, these rights gave her a quiet independence that grew stronger with age. In towns where widows managed shops or inns, they became respected figures.
Their signatures appear in ledgers,
Their names attached to contracts and donations. The system that began as protection sometimes became a path to autonomy. For those of lesser means, the union remained a partnership of necessity. A husband's strength and a wife's endurance were the true currency of survival. The dowry might vanish quickly, spent on seed, on tools, on food. What endured was cooperation. The seasons guided their days, planting, tending, harvesting, resting. The home filled with the sound of children, the barking of dogs, the crackle of fires that burned year after year in the same hearth. Each evening, the pair might sit in silence, listening to the wind at the door, their thoughts carried by fatigue and quiet gratitude. In such stillness, affection deepened, not declared in words, but shown through the constancy of effort. A shared loaf, a repaired garment,
a shoulder offered in the chill of dawn.
This was the true dowry, and the one built day by day. Even among the nobility, where luxury surrounded life, the essence of union remained the same. Beneath the silk and ceremony, marriage was endurance. It was the slow weaving of two fates through seasons of peace and uncertainty. The dowry, once transferred, became invisible, its gold turned into fields, its jewels into roofs and walls. It vanished into the life it sustained,
the quiet miracle of continuity.
Through centuries, the pattern repeated. Families grew, divided, rejoined. Children inherited what their mothers had once brought as gifts. In this way, the dowry became not just wealth, but memory, a trace of love expressed in the only form the age allowed.
For all its formality,
marriage held space for gentleness. When illness came, partners cared for one another with patience. When hardship struck, they worked side by side. And in old age, when the fire burned low and the house fell silent, they often found that the bond forged by duty had quietly become one of affection. No poet celebrated these lives. No song carried their names. Yet the world was built upon them, upon their steadiness, their small acts of faith, their willingness to share a burden. The dowry may have been counted in silver, but the value of a union was measured in time. In mornings, survived; in winters, endured; in lives lived together until the final day. Every exchange, every promise was a way to keep the thread of life unbroken. Gold could be spent, land could be lost, but the quiet bond between two souls, once formed, remained. Forbidden love and widows. In every age, love has lived within rules. And in every age, there have been those who quietly stepped beyond them. During the Middle Ages, the laws of affection were carefully drawn. Families arranged unions, lords approved them, the church sanctified them. Everything followed its order. And yet, in the still corners of the heart, beyond duty and law, feeling continued to grow. A nobleman might find his eyes drawn to someone beneath his rank. A lady in waiting, a companion, a servant. Such emotions were not meant to exist. But sometimes they could not be contained. When these attachments were discovered, they were treated not as passion, but as disgrace. Rumors spread like wildfire through the corridors of stone. Letters were burned, names were spoken in whispers. A single glance could alter a family's fate. The cost of love was high: loss of title, loss of land, loss of peace. Yet still, some hearts took that risk. A few fled into the countryside, marrying in secret, choosing devotion over duty.
Most, however, returned to silence,
their love folded away within memory, hidden but never gone. Poets later softened these stories. They turned scandal into sorrow and sorrow into beauty. For in a world built on restraint, to love at all was seen as courage. In the towns and villages, similar stories unfolded in quieter forms. A farmer's son might love a girl from another lord's estate. A widow might remarry without permission. Each act carried risk, not of ruin, but of judgment.
Life was watched closely.
Neighbors noticed everything. The church kept careful record. To love beyond permission was to live in shadow. In monasteries and convents where vows forbade affection, the heart sometimes whispered still. Within those cold walls, among candles and parchment, men and women struggled to quiet their longing. But human feeling is not easily silenced. A priest might write to a nun, in words that seemed pure yet carried hidden tenderness. A look exchanged across a chapel. A line in a psalm,
a silence that said more than speech.
This became the language of forbidden affection. Most of these stories were never told. They remain as fragments, verses unsigned, confessions half erased, notes written in the margins of prayer books.
Traces of hearts that lived and loved.
In secret, beyond the cloisters and the courts,
there existed another kind of story.
One that belonged to widows. When a woman lost her husband, the laws around her life changed. For the first time, she could own property. She could manage her household. She could decide whether or not to marry again. In a world ruled by men, this was rare freedom.
Many widows chose solitude.
They found peace in independence, in the tending of land, in the raising of children, in the quiet order of their own making. Others sought companionship again, but not as before. No longer arranged, no longer bound by alliance. Their choices came from feeling. Later in life, love often returned to them gently. No longer a rush of youth, but a calm flame, steady, kind, and free from pretense. These women were respected and feared in equal measure. They carried knowledge, they held property, they made decisions without permission. To some they symbolized wisdom, and to others, unsettling independence. Yet their presence slowly reshaped how people thought. About women and autonomy.
In town records,
Their names appear as traders, landowners, and lenders. They sign contracts, they manage estates, they stand as witnesses in court. They were the keepers of family continuity, the ones who made sure that what was built did not vanish with loss. When widows chose to love again, they often chose differently. They sought kindness, patience, companionship. They were drawn not by wealth or power, but by peace. In these later unions, there was a quiet equality. Both had known loss. Both understood the fragility of time.
together they built something grounded and sincere.
Across these tales of hidden affection, of soft defiance, of widowed resilience, one truth remains constant.
The heart, even in the strictest age,
Finds its way. It moves like water through rock, slowly, persistently, carving paths unseen. It speaks through glances, through gestures, through acts of care that require no words. History remembers the grand alliances,
the arranged marriages of kingdoms,
the treaties signed in candlelight.
but the smaller stories are what kept the world alive.
The touch of a hand before parting, the letter never sent, the widow's smile across a market.
Love, when forbidden,
Does not vanish. It hides,
it transforms,
it becomes strength,
and when freedom finally arrives,
whether through courage or through time. It reappears softly, like spring returning to the earth. A pause. The cello softens to a murmur, joined by faint harp chords. So even in an age of obedience and silence, the quiet rebellion of love endured. It flowed beneath laws and vows.
through hearts that refused to forget what it meant to feel.
The noble who risked his name, the nun who wrote her secret verse, the widow who found joy again in later years. Each lived differently, but all carried the same truth, that love, even when unseen, is still the purest form of being human. They lived, they cared,
They endured,
and across the centuries, their quiet defiance still echoes. Not in sorrow, but in calm. Destiny and the stars. In the wide dark of the medieval night, people often looked upward. The sky stretched above towns and fields like a quiet map, steady and bright. Constellations marked the seasons. The slow drift of planets traced patterns that seemed to answer the movement of human life. Before clocks were common and maps were precise, the heavens offered a frame for time and choice. Farmers watched the moon to guide their planting. Sailors learned the rise and fall of familiar stars to keep a straight course. Travelers set out at dawn when certain signs felt favorable, and households marked important days by the steady wheel of the year. Astrology, as it was practiced then, gave structure to uncertainty. Charts were drawn with careful lines, angles measured with steady hands. Notes written in clear ink across pale parchment. The sky did not speak in words, but in the quiet logic of repetition. What returned each year could be learned, and what returned could be trusted. When two families planned a marriage, they sometimes asked for a reading. A day was chosen for its balance, a month for its gentle weather, an hour for its ease. The arrangement of planets might be copied into a small booklet, tucked away with tokens and kept as a Within towns, learned observers charted the movements of the wandering lights: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, each with a pace of its own.
They followed cycles across the ecliptic,
noting how one rose as another declined, how conjunctions gathered and dispersed like slow tides. To those who studied these rhythms, the sky seemed less like a mystery and more like a great clock, calm and predictable, patiently turning. Beyond the scholars, the common customs were gentler. People noticed small signs and folded them into daily life. A certain bird calling at daybreak could be taken as a favorable start. A breeze from the east on a planting morning felt like permission to proceed. A cloudless new moon held a quiet promise of clear nights to come. None of this was dramatic. It was simply the language of habit and attention, built from long observation and passed along in steady voices. Some marks upon the body, a mole, a birthmark, a streak of hair, were described in simple terms as tokens of character. A mark near the wrist suggested nimble hands, on the brow, a thoughtful nature. Such sayings were not binding, they were gentle ways of describing what people already sensed. About those they knew well. In this world of patient signs, life slowed to meet the pace of the sky. A household quieted as the sun went down. Candles were lit. The room settled into the small arc of light, and beyond the door, the stars took their places. Children traced simple constellations with a finger. Adults counted the months by the phases of the moon. The night did not press. It unfolded.
Travel along the roads kept to the seasons.
In spring, rivers ran fuller, and crossings were chosen with care. In summer, paths were dry and quick, though heat asked for early starts. In autumn, carts returned heavy with grain, and apples, the air thinner, the stars sharper. In winter, journeys shortened, and the long sky felt closer than ever. A vast lid of quiet, glittering and still. For many, the stars brought comfort more than instruction. They were consistent when the ground was not. A failed harvest changed a village, a storm reshaped a coast, but the same constellations returned on schedule, like old companions at the door. To notice them was a way of saying, "The world continues." Among artisans, a different rhythm tied the heavens to work. A metal worker planned long heats on mild nights. A dyer preferred steady weather for drying cloth. A miller listened for wind, and a cooper watched humidity for the swelling of staves. While none of this required a chart, many still felt that the sky's quiet order helped a steady hand and a settled mind. In some places, small almanacs circulated. They were plain and compact, listing phases of the moon, names of stars, notes on weather patterns gathered from earlier years. A page might suggest a day favorable for pruning trees, another for setting beans, another for resting fields. These were prompts, not commands. Useful when the eye and the ground agreed, set aside when they did not. When omens were mentioned, they were often simple and local. A ring around the moon suggested moisture in high air. A deep red sunset hinted at dust or wind to follow. Frost on the thatch spoke of a clear morning. Hoarfrost on branches promised a bright day once the sun rose. Such signs connected people to the air around them, reminding them that weather, like time, moved in patient cycles. Marriages, too, sometimes leaned on the sky's cadence. A date near the waxing moon felt like a natural beginning, growth implied within the symbol. A union made in late spring carried the ease of longer light, useful for gatherings and travel. Autumn brought its own calm. A completed harvest and cooler air, guests arriving with baskets and quiet voices. The belief was not in force, but in harmony, a
Plans aligning with a broader rhythm so that the start felt settled and sure.
Stories told by the fire sometimes included the heavens as setting rather than decree. A shepherd spoke of sleeping under Orion, a traveler of finding the North Star when the road was unclear. These were practical tales threaded with steady admiration for the night. The sky was not distant.
It was above the roof, over the field,
The same in every direction. Even in cities where lamps and hearths warmed the streets, the night retained a depth that modern eyes rarely see. Roofs were flat, and people could climb them for cool air. There, with the wind moving slowly, they could name the familiar shapes, the curve of the Great Bear, the clean triangle of a summer star. The path of the Milky Way folded like pale silk across the dark. Silence gathered in those moments, and thoughts settled with it. The language of destiny softened with use. It became less a claim and more a manner of listening. A chart suggested patience. A moon phase invited timing. Signs were read as companions to judgment, not replacements. In the steadiness of that approach, people found reassurance without severity. When a child was born, someone might note the night's appearance, the wind, the phase of the moon, the hour when sleep finally returned to the household. These notes went into memory, tied to nothing and to everything, a way of remembering that beginnings happen within a larger order. Years later, that same child might learn the names of stars, stand in a doorway on a clean evening, and feel a quiet continuity with the world overhead. The path from cradle to standing in the night was long, but the sky remained the same, generous and unchanging. In times of uncertainty, people often stepped outside for air. They watched the familiar lights, took a breath, and returned indoors with a calmer step. This habit needed no belief to support it. It was simply the steadying effect of distance and pattern, a view wide enough to slow the mind. So the medieval night, far from being emptied, was full of guidance of the gentlest kind. Constellations returned on schedule. The moon kept its quiet calendar. Planets measured long seasons with patient arcs. And human life adjusted its pace to match, not with strict obedience, but with a soft readiness to move when movement felt right. By the time the first light appeared in the east, the need for the stars receded. Dew brightened on grass, tools were lifted from hooks. Footpaths filled with the sound of steps. The world turned toward work, carrying the calm of the night forward into the day. The thread of destiny, read in the sky, did not command, it reminded. It said, in its own silent way, that life finds balance when attention is steady, that choices are easier when made at the measured pace of the earth and the heavens together. In this balance, people felt held. They set their dates, kept their promises, and lived their seasons with a little more ease. Tomyris, Queen of the Steppe. Far beyond stone cities and walled courts, the land widens into grass and sky. It is a space without corners, a horizon drawn in a quiet circle. Here, people live by motion. They carry their homes, follow their herds, and keep time with seasons rather than bells. Among these riders, one name endures, Tomyris. Her story comes to us through the historian Herodotus, a line carried forward from a distant age. It is a mixture of memory and report, but its shape has remained clear. A queen who ruled the Massagetæ and who stood without fear before an empire. Cyrus the Great had already crossed mountains and rivers, gathering kingdoms into the reach of Persia. His soldiers were disciplined, his will consistent, his advance steady. When he turned toward the north and east, he met the open world of the steppe, and the realm of Tomiris. She did not rule from marble halls.
Her authority moved with her people, tent to tent, camp to camp,
along grass that bent with the wind and lifted again. Leadership here was presence to ride among one's own, to judge fairly, to keep the pace of the tribe in balance with pasture and weather. Cyrus sought to draw her into his order. Envoys carried proposals across the river that divided their worlds. Tomiris declined with clarity. She would not trade movement for walls, and she would not place her people beneath a foreign hand. The river was crossed. Scouts traced the lines of approach. On an open plain, under a measured sun, the two powers met. Accounts differ in detail, but the outline is firm. Tomiris did not rule from behind the line, she rode within it. Her people moved as they were taught, from youth light in the saddle, steady with the bow, turning, dividing, gathering, as if the grass itself were guiding their path. The battle closed and opened like breath. Far edges of dust marked where riders wheeled and returned.
Bows bent and released with practiced calm.
There was no palace to seize, no wall to breach, only the task of holding space and refusing to yield. By day's end, Cyrus lay among the fallen. Persia's line had reached the edge of a world it could not claim. Tomiris remained. Herodotus tells that she ordered the body of Cyrus to be found, and that she spoke words of final balance. In his telling, she placed his head in a vessel of blood, a gesture meant to return excess to its measure. Whether this scene occurred as written or not, the meaning is steady. It is a mark of limits restored,
a sign that even great ambition meets a horizon.
The story of Tomiris spread along caravan roads and river routes. It entered the speech of singers and the notes of scribes. Later, in distant centuries, painters placed her in quiet light, armor unadorned, gaze level, a figure of composure rather than display. In each retelling, one thing remained, the assurance of a leader who knew the ground she stood upon. To understand the force of this moment, it helps to see how the Massagetae lived. They raised horses, cattle, and sheep.
They learned to ride almost as soon as they learned to walk.
Their tents were frames of wood and felt built for taking down and setting up again. Their wealth was counted in animals, tools, and skill. Their safety in the watchfulness of companions. They did not measure life by stone or by throne. They measured it by distance traveled, grass recovered, water found, and the return of stars to their familiar places. The steppe was their home, not a border to defend, but a path to follow with care. Tomiris held this life together with consistency. She kept counsel with elders and riders, weighed disputes, and decided when to move and when to stay. Authority was not a crown, it was a rhythm, felt and kept. Cyrus's defeat at the hands of a nomad queen became a line that others remembered. It reminded listeners that maps drawn in palaces do not always reach the plain. It also reminded them that a people whose strength is motion cannot be held by the tools made for cities. Centuries passed, and the story shifted in tone, but not in course. In one place, Tomiris was a symbol of justice. In another, a guardian of independence. In another, a quiet figure of maternal resolve. The language changed, yet the center did not move. A woman meeting force without fear, returning a vast will to its measure. What remains most striking is the calm of the tale. There is no account of triumphal parades, no lists of tribute, no hunger for territory. Tomiris is not remembered for what she took, but for what she refused to surrender. The steppe continued after her as it had before, green in spring, pale in summer, brown in autumn, white in winter. Herds moved, children learned to ride. Fires burned low under wide skies. In that continuity, her name traveled like a steady wind, present but never heavy. The Massagetes left few marks a stonekeeper could save. Their records were paths, their archive the memory of those who rode. Yet one memory carried far enough to reach this quiet telling. A queen held a line. An empire paused, the horizon stayed where it had always been. Artists of later ages placed Tomyris in rooms she never knew. They painted her with banners and vessels, with woven tapestries and polished metal. Even there, among objects of weight, her presence is stillness. She stands as if the wind were at her back, as if the ground beneath her were open and sure. The long balance between expansion and return has many scenes. This is one of them. It says that power is not only the reach of an arm, but the steadiness of a stance. It says a life built on motion can be as enduring as one built on stone. On quiet nights, in places where grass meets sky, the air carries a sound that could be hooves or could be wind. It moves in a line that is both straight and endless. Somewhere in that line there is a shape of a rider, calm, forward, unhurried. The name given to that shape is Tomyris. Her story asks for no additions. It sits lightly in the flow of time, clear and unforced. A leader held to her ground. Her people continued their pace. The world turned, and the plain remained wide. Nomads of the ancient world. Beyond the settled valleys and walled cities, the ancient world was shaped by the movement of its nomads. They crossed continents on horses and wagons, following the rhythm of seasons, grass, and stars. They carried their homes, and with them their culture, their memory, and their quiet endurance. Among the wide spaces of Eurasia, the steppe stretched from the Danube to the borders of China, an unbroken sea of grass that changed color with the year. Here lived the Massagetes, the Scythians, the Sarmatians, and later the Mongols. Peoples connected not by borders, but by distance and direction. Each group moved according to need, seeking water in dry months and shelter in cold ones. The land gave little permanence, but it gave enough to sustain. A tent could be raised in a day, a herd moved by dawn, a fire lit where the grass met the sky. Their life was not hardship as others imagined, but balance. To those who lived in cities, the nomads seemed untamed. To the nomads themselves, stillness felt unnatural. Freedom was motion, to follow pasture, to travel without permission, to be shaped by space rather than by walls. Their animals were their livelihood: horses, cattle, camels, sheep, and goats. The herd was both wealth and companionship. From it came milk, hides, and meat, and with it came movement, for no pasture lasted forever. Children learned early to ride. They stood on horseback before they could run far on foot, to balance, to guide, to trust the animal beneath them. These were lessons taught not in words, but in repetition. A rider grew up as part of the herd, not separate from it. Communities moved together in loose formations. Each family kept its own animals, yet shared watch and labor. At night, circles of tents glowed with quiet light. The stars mirrored above and the fires mirrored below. The air was full of simple sounds: the slow breathing of horses, the soft percussion of leather and rope. Trade routes wound through this openness. What cities could not easily reach, the nomads carried. They moved between worlds, silk and jade from the east, amber and glass from the west. Each caravan became a thread in the fabric of connection. that joined the ancient continents.
They were not simply wanderers, they were messengers, bridges between cultures,
Languages mixed in their camps, new customs blended with the old. A piece of metalwork might bear designs from far away. A song might carry words from two different tongues. In motion, they became the link between the settled and the free. Though their homes left no lasting walls, their influence was deep. They spread not architecture, but movement, patterns of exchange, of migration, of ideas traveling quietly across the world. Women in these communities often shared in leadership. Many could ride, hunt, and fight. They kept the tents, managed herds, and, when needed, took up bow and spear beside the men. Burial sites from the steppes reveal armor and ornaments that belonged to women as well as men, evidence not of legend but of balance. Among them, some served as healers and guides. Their knowledge came from observation: plants for wounds, herbs for rest, rituals for harmony within the group. The sky and land were their teachers, each season its own kind of lesson. In these communities, the sense of belonging was not to a place, but to the pattern of travel itself. They knew the rivers by curve, the mountains by outline, the stars by path. What stayed constant was not the ground, but the knowledge of where to find water, shelter, and each other. When outsiders met them, they often misunderstood. City chroniclers described them as wild or rootless, unable to see the order in their motion, but their life had structure.
the migration of herds,
the sharing of work, the calm acceptance of change. Their government was light, their law direct. A council of elders or a respected leader guided decisions, yet authority was earned, not inherited. Respect followed experience, age, skill, and fairness were the marks of trust.
The young learned by watching,
By repetition and patience, they learned to repair harness, to pack and unpack the tent, to read the weather in the turn of the wind. Education was continuous and quiet. Knowledge passed in gestures, in timing, in shared work at dawn. The nomads left little written record, but their presence is everywhere. Their horses carried news across kingdoms. Their trade shaped economies far from their home. Even their way of war, swift, coordinated, moving as a single current, changed the way empires planned defense. And yet, beyond the battles and routes, the true legacy of the nomads was endurance.
they lived with the earth's rhythm.
Not against it. They took what could be renewed and left little behind but tracks that vanished with the wind. In winter, when snow lay deep, they stayed near rivers or low valleys, building windbreaks from reeds and brush. In spring, the world opened again, and they followed the returning grass. The pattern repeated without ceremony. It did not need names, it was simply the way of things. Night after night, fires marked small points of light across the steppe. A song might carry through the air, slow, minor, sung for rhythm more than melody. Children fell asleep to the sound of wind,
Their dreams filled with the endless horizon.
even as kingdoms rose and fell far away. The nomads movement continued unconcerned with borders. They were witnesses to time crossing lands that empires only briefly held. Their silence was their strength. Their lightness was their survival. To move meant to endure, to know when to go and when to stay.
Was wisdom learned over generations. Today, little remains of their cities.
Because there were none, but their influence endures in the paths we still use. Roads that began as trails of hoofprints, routes that once carried their wagons and words.
When we speak of the ancient world,
We often imagine temples and palaces, crowds and stone,
yet the open land carried its own civilization.
quiet, mobile, and lasting. In the great balance of human history, they represent the other half, those who chose space instead of walls, wind instead of marble, motion instead of monument.
The nomads of the ancient world
Did not seek to conquer or to be remembered. They sought to live within movement, and in doing so, they shaped the quiet paths that still connect us. The spirit of the steppe. In the endless lands of the steppe, faith was not written in books or carved in stone. It was carried in the air, in the flight of a bird, in the turning of the seasons, in the quiet pulse of the earth beneath a horse's hoof. The people who lived in motion did not separate the sacred from the everyday. Their world was whole. The wind was a presence, the sky a protector,
the earth a giver of life,
the sun the fire that sustained all. When dawn spread its pale light, families stepped from their tents and faced the east. They did not recite long prayers. They simply stood for a moment in silence, acknowledging the warmth that returned once more. At night, before sleep, they looked to the stars. Each cluster had a name. Each movement had a story. The heavens were both calendar and companion.
Time was not counted in hours,
but in cycles. The moon's roundness, the growth of grass, the return of migrating birds. To the people of the plains, spirit moved in all things. A stone held memory. A river carried voice. The flame of a fire could listen as much as it could give light. When travelers spoke to the fire, that they did so softly, believing it could carry their words into the night air. There were those who served as bridges between what could be seen and what could not. They were called by many names: healers, dreamers, guides. Later generations would call them shamans. Their task was not command but communication. They listened for meaning in wind and water, in the trembling of a horse, in the shape of smoke rising straight or twisting away. When illness came, they gathered herbs and whispered to the air. When storms threatened, they sang to the clouds with low, rhythmic tones. Theirs was a quiet kind of knowledge, not doctrine, but attention. They carried songs instead of scriptures, symbols instead of temples. Every object held potential. A drum made from skin and wood, a feather bound with thread, a stone smoothed by water. Each could open the path between worlds. Around the fire, these figures told stories of creation and return. They spoke of a sky spirit wide and watchful, and of the living world below, ever-changing, ever-dependent. Between them stretched the open air, the realm through which all breath and movement passed. When someone died,
it was said that their soul,
riding the same wind that bent the grass, the living did not speak of death as an ending, but as a continuation of motion. The path of the spirit was like the path of a rider, disappearing over the horizon, out of sight, but still moving, still part of the plane. The rituals were simple, but each act carried weight. A cup of fermented milk poured onto the ground, a thread tied to a tree branch,
a handful of ashes scattered with care.
Nothing was wasted.
Everything returned.
Because the steppe itself changed constantly. Grass growing, rivers shifting, herds moving. Beliefs too remained flexible. There was no need for walls or temples. A tent could become a shrine, a mountain could serve as altar, a silence could be as holy as a song. When different tribes met along the trade routes, they shared more than goods. They exchanged customs, songs, and understandings. The beliefs of one group folded gently into those of another, each adapting without conflict. It was faith shaped by travel, open like the horizon itself. In some places, the worship of the sky took form in the word Tengri, a name for the high blue dome above the world. Tengri was not distant or separate. It was the sum of balance, the endless air, the rhythm of sun and moon, the quiet return of order after storm. To live in harmony with this balance
was the highest devotion.
Even power was measured against it. A ruler who lost fairness or patience was said to have fallen out of favor with the sky. A community that lived with care and respect was believed to rest under clear weather and steady light. Morality for them was not rule, but alignment. A life kept in rhythm with the greater pattern. The shaman's drum marked this rhythm. Its beat matched the heartbeat of the listener, slow, grounded, constant. When played by firelight, its sound echoed the thud of hooves, the whisper of wind, the rise and fall of breath. To hear it was to remember that all things moved together. Children learned early that the world was alive. They were told not to waste water, not to frighten animals without cause, not to take more than was needed. Each small act carried the weight of balance. Respect was not command, it was cooperation. In summer, when storms rolled across the plains, families waited in stillness. Lightning flashed and they said the sky was speaking. When rain returned after drought, they thanked it not with ceremony, but with work. Repairing roofs, gathering water, continuing the pattern of life renewed. The beliefs of the nomads traveled with them. As they moved, they adapted, absorbing fragments of new thought from traders and neighbors, folding them quietly into their own. Nothing was rejected completely and nothing dominated entirely. The result was a faith both fluid and enduring, as shifting yet as steady as the steppe itself. When night fell, fires glowed in small circles across the plain. Voices dropped low. Someone might hum a tune about the skies turning or the journey of souls through the stars. The melody carried far but softly, joining the rhythm of wind and grass. To listen was to rest. To watch the fire was to see time moving gently forward. No temple could contain that feeling, no book could fix it. It belonged to the open air, to the silence that stretched beyond sight, to the comfort of knowing that nothing truly ends. It only changes direction. For the nomads, belief was not a choice. It was a presence, as near as breath, as vast as sky. In every journey they carried it with them,
A stillness that guided without commanding,
a trust in the unseen pattern that holds the world together. The Transcontinental Railroad. In the 19th century, a new path crossed the wide interior of a continent. It did not move on hooves.
it moved on rails.
The Transcontinental Railroad joined the Atlantic and the Pacific, drawing a line through forests, deserts, and mountains, turning months of travel into days and distance into connection. Before the rails, a journey across the land was an act of endurance. Wagons followed river valleys and narrow trails. Riders carried messages through weather and dust. The horizon felt endless and time stretched long. In 1862, a plan took shape in Law and Surveyors, Inc. Two companies would build toward each other. From the east, the Union Pacific would set out from Omaha. From the west, the Central Pacific would depart from Sacramento. Between them lay plains, basins, canyons, and the long spine of the Sierra Nevada. Progress began in small, steady motions. Trees were cut for ties, iron was hauled and stacked in neat bars. Surveyors marked routes with thin flags that bent in the wind. Track gangs aligned rails by eye and levels set each to the next and drove spikes until the air rang like a bell. Across the high country, thousands of workers arrived from overseas. Many were young men from southern China. They labored in heat and snow, cut tunnels through granite, hung in baskets over cliffs, and built trestles across deep ravines. They cooked their own food, kept careful order in their camps, and returned each morning to the measured swing of hammers. On the plains, many crews were Irish immigrants, veterans of hard years and long voyages. They graded roadbed across open prairie, bridged muddy creeks, and laid rail at a pace that learned the rhythm of the day: lift, place, align, strike. A quiet sequence repeated mile after mile.
Others joined as well:
freedmen, local laborers, teamsters, blacksmiths, and cooks. Each role necessary, each shift part of the same forward motion. At dusk, canvas tents rose in orderly rows. Fires glowed. Voices drifted in different languages, then settled to silence beneath a wide night. The work was constant and exacting. In winter, snow buried tools and track. Avalanches cut lines and took lives in a breath. In summer, heat pressed down on the prairie, and dust lifted in slow sheets behind each passing wagon. Still the line advanced over ridges, along benches, and across hardpan, the steel catching light before dimming under grit. The railroad altered more than travel. It changed the map of daily life. Water stops became towns. Storefronts opened where sidings were placed. A new sound entered the landscape, the long whistle of an engine, and the even patient beat of wheels. For the indigenous nations of the interior, the change was heavy. Buffalo paths were crossed and split. Old trails were cut by fences and rails. Where quiet had been, smoke and iron arrived, bringing settlers, soldiers, and survey stakes. Ways of life that had followed the herds for generations were pressed by lines that did not move. The builders on both roads felt other weights. They faced risk without notice, earned wages that vanished quickly, and rarely saw their names recorded for praise. But their work remained.
Every tie, every spike, every length of rail
was a mark of their endurance, fixed into the ground for strangers to pass over with ease. On May 10, 1869, the lines met at Promontory Summit in the Utah Territory. Engines faced one another across a final gap. Crowds gathered, and a polished spike was set for ceremony. Its blows were sent along telegraph wires, clicking across the country in the same instant. The signal was simple and final. The road was joined. Few of the workers who had built the line stood at the front that day. Their absence did not erase their labor. The proof of their hands lay underfoot, in the smooth join of rails, in bridges that held, and in tunnels cut clean through stone. Once trains began to run, the rhythm of travel changed. Time along T, timetables, whistles, couplings, stations listed on painted boards. Freight moved in long strings of cars, grain east, manufactured goods west. Passengers sat by windows and watched the country pass. Grasslands, red rock, pine shadow, river light, all carried at the calm speed of steam.
Towns adjusted to the line's clock.
Mail arrived more quickly. News traveled with the trains. Markets widened. A letter crossed the continent in days
and arrived folded, creased, legible.
Handwriting from far away that felt suddenly near. But the line's gifts carried a cost. The great herds dwindled, the open sound of the plains narrowed.
Land once traveled in wide arcs,
was divided into sections and sold. For many, the railroad meant opportunity. For many others, it meant loss. Still the rails held. They weathered heat and frost, grew smooth and dark with use, and settled deeper into the grade with each passing season. The work that created them remained visible in details. At the angle of a cut, the curve eased to fit the land, the stones stacked in patient courses beneath a span. Some workers stayed with the track they had built. They opened small businesses near depots, married and raised families within earshot of evening trains. Others returned across the ocean, carrying stories of snow tunnels and high bridges. Many simply moved on to new work, their names kept in family memory. And in the quiet record of a line that still ran. Over time, the railroad became more than machinery. It became a symbol of connection across distance, of human effort set in sequence, of a continent understood as one continuous reach. It also became a mirror showing both ambition and consequence, both speed and the things speed leaves behind. At night, the sound of a freight could be heard far off, soft as a tide on iron, a low, regular pulse moving through darkness. People paused at their windows and listened as it approached, passed and faded. Even without seeing the cars, they could feel the measured weight of them and the calm certainty of a journey kept.
Much of that route survives.
Freight still moves where herds once grazed. Passenger trains follow curves first traced by stakes and string. Timber bridges gave way to steel and steam to diesel, but the path remains the same, across prairie and basin, through cuts and tunnels toward a far shore. The railroad belongs to a longer story. That began with people who moved by sky and season. It is another form of passage, another way horizon meets horizon. Horses gave speed to the rider. Rails gave speed to the land itself. Both are lines of connection, drawn in different ages by the same human wish to reach. As the train recedes, its sound thins into wind. The rails cool in the night air. Stars return in their patient order. Somewhere, a late whistle rises once and falls away. The country is quiet again, the line still present, but at rest. In the morning, the care continues, switches checked, bolts tightened.
Grades inspected where rain has cut the shoulder.
The work holds the road, and the road holds its promise. The story of travel does not end. It changes vehicles and names, but the motion remains from camp to camp, from town to town, from one coast to the other, over the same old ground under new light. From hoof to wheel, from trail to rail, the line continues dash dash, steady and unbroken, carried by hands, now quiet, and by the earth that bears them all. The endless thread. The line grows quiet. The sound of steel has gone. Only the air remains moving gently across the open land. The journey from the first village and field,
through the courts and castles, through the tents of the plains,
and the long rail of the west, has come to rest here in silence.
All movement has its echo.
Every traveler, every worker,
Every dream that crossed from one horizon to another
leaves a thread behind, thin, invisible, but strong enough to hold memory in place. When the world is still, you can almost feel it. It runs beneath the surface of time, connecting what was with what remains. The sound of a forge becomes the hum of an engine. The beat of hooves becomes the turning of wheels. Each age hands its rhythm to the next. Somewhere far off, a train continues along the night. Its windows are dim, its sound is steady, fading, then gone.
The land rests again.
Wind bends the grass. Water moves softly through dark soil. Above, stars turn without hurry, tracing the same patient paths. They have followed since the first stories were told. In this quiet, there are no borders, no walls, no engines or empires. Only the endless thread, the line that runs through all things, from voice to silence, from day to night, from breath to rest. It holds the memory of every road, every tent,
every campfire seen and forgotten. It binds the traveler and the place at
the maker and the dream, the past and the now. As you listen, the world narrows to stillness. The motion slows, the body softens, the eyes close. Time folds like cloth, quiet and complete. The thread continues, but it does not need to be followed. It is enough to know that it remains, soft, steady, carrying you forward into rest.